Hello, I'm Mike, and this is Will. We are the Table Donkeys.
Hello.
And we're bringing you issue 4 of Warhammer 40,000 Combat Patrol magazine today. And this issue actually came with our first paints. So we got 3 paints, Macragge Blue, Baranol Burgundy, and Wraithbone, which are all base paints, and we've got a Citadel starter brush as well. So we'll be applying those to our models, and also in today's game we'll be learning how to use the data sheets we got in the previous issue. So looking into the issue, we're straight into our painting guide, our beginner's guide on how to paint. So it goes over all the sort of equipment you'll need. So you obviously need your brush and paints, and some sort of container for water, and something you can use as a paint palette. And I would also suggest using some newspaper or something to cover your work surface, just in case you get any paint on it. Goes over some of the essentials. So you've got a water pot. You can either use the Citadel branded one, which is apparently quite good. It's got a nice wide base, so it's hard to knock over, and it has little lines you can use to make a fine point on your brush, but a mug is just fine. And Citadel also sell colour palettes, but again, an old plate or a kitchen tile or something is perfectly adequate as well. And it goes over the brushes you'll get with this collection. So we have the starter brush. Later on we'll get a base brush, a dry brush, a layer brush, and a texture spreader. And then some of the techniques of painting. So we're actually applying an undercoat. This is usually the first thing you'll do when you start painting. Applying a base layer of colour to the model so that the later layers of paint have something to stick to. Quite often the undercoat will be the majority colour of the model as well. So as we're going to be painting our Space Marines as the Ultramarines, you're starting with a blue undercoat, as you can see here. Before you start to use the paint, you want to shake it up to make sure it's mixed. Sometimes paints can separate because they have medium and the pigments, and put it somewhere where you're not going to knock it. And you take some of your paint and put it on the palette. Don't overload the brush too much, and then you'll want to wash off your brush and then use the now clean brush to put some water onto the paint that's on your palette to thin it out. So you can see there, you don't want to apply the paint too thickly because it can obscure the details and leave brush marks as well on larger areas, but you don't want the paint so thin that it's not actually sticking to the model and it's just watery. So there's a little bit of a balancing act, but it's ideal to do multiple thin layers rather than one thick one. Gives you a couple of ideas of how to actually hold the model. So resting your wrists on the desk so you have nice fine balance. So if you're trying to paint something more detailed, maybe hold your wrists together and try and hold the model by the base so you're not rubbing off any of the paint as you're trying to paint the miniature. And as I said, doing multiple coats, leaving a few minutes of drying time for each coat. Often you'll do models in batches, so by the time you've done the last one, the first coat of the first model will be dry, and you want to clean your brush fairly often so it doesn't get clogged with paint. And you do want to change your painting water regularly, especially if you're using metallic paint or you're going to paint a lighter colour than the paint you just used, because sometimes it can taint the colours. And then the start of the painting guide for the Space Marines, where we're just doing a solid undercoat of Macragge Blue. They've actually separated the captain from the rock on his base so you can get all the underside of his cloak, and the method for painting the Infernus Marines is exactly the same. And also painting the Tyranids, this time with Wraithbone, which may take several more coats because it's a little bit of a lighter colour and it can be a bit thinner. But there you can see the undercoated models, and you don't need to undercoat the entire base, but you do need to paint the captain's little rockery he's standing on. And now we have some backstory for the Silver Templars, and it's in the style of someone telling a story to the new Space Marine recruits. And it kind of goes over the Silver Templars' attitude towards warfare. They form a particular bond with a specific weapon and become masters of that weapon. This bond was called the Bond Martial, and it's so strong that it's a grave insult to lose a weapon, and the Marines will actually swear oaths to retrieve their weapon if they somehow manage to lose it. So in this example we have Sergeant Askerton. He and his squad were masters of the Stalker bolt rifle, and there's a little box there about Space Marine homeworlds. So you have the Silver Templars homeworld of Navaris. Almost every chapter will have a homeworld which houses their fortress monastery, and it's also where they recruit most of their new members. And then we have some more name generation boxes for the characters we got. So we've got the 3 Space Marine characters we'll be getting, and it gives you a little bit of info about each one. So we have the captain in Terminator armour first. You can give him a title. And as you saw on the previous page, there was a chaplain on bike and a librarian in Terminator armour, which we'll be getting in future issues. And then we have the same thing for the 2 Tyranid characters we get. So we have the winged Tyranid Prime and the parasite of Mortrex. Again, you can give them a title, and it does give you a tiny bit of background on each one, but we'll talk more about them as we get them. But now I'll hand you over to Will, and you can take us into today's game.
So now we'll be on to our game for this issue, and the squad of Infernus Marines that we saw one member of in action in the previous issue have finished burning away the Tyranid infestation, but they've now run out of ammunition. But unfortunately on their way back to base they've been ambushed by some von Ryan's Leapers, and so furious melee will ensue. And the principal thing we're going to be learning in this game is how to use some of the numbers on the data sheets that we got with the collection articles and also on our combat cards. So first up we have the mission itself, and you can see we've got the board when we're back to having some models stand around in the centre and fight in melee. There's no movement in this game, so to start with at least we've got 3 Infernus Marines against 1 Von Ryan's Leaper, and they start next to each other and in melee. Unsurprisingly, the first side to be wiped out loses, the other side will win, but it does say once you play through it once, you can try using different numbers of Leapers and Infernus Marines and take into account the correct number of attacks accordingly depending on how many models you've got, so we'll probably try that as well. And then we have the little walkthrough, and you can see from some of the information that's been printed here how to use some of the numbers on the data sheets. So every weapon that a model has a profile. In this case we're only using the melee weapons, so you can see the melee weapons for the Infernus Marines are their close combat weapons, and the values you need at each step are highlighted with the red box. So when they're making their hit rolls, you need the A for attacks and WS for weapon skill characteristic information. So as you can see, each Infernus Marine has 3 attacks and a weapon skill of 3+, which means they hit on 3s. And then with their hits they will try and wound, and as you can see they have a strength of 4 with their close combat weapons as highlighted in the second box. Although the little graphic on the top right there is wrong there, because it says 3 to 6 is a wound, which should actually be only 5 and 6, which is correct in the text, so just bear that in mind, since the Leapers have a toughness of 5, which you can see in the bottom box. So that's actually highlighted in the top set of numbers on each datasheet. The T characteristic there is the toughness of the. And then you're also going to need the SV, or save characteristic, when making your save rolls. So when it says a 4+ save, the Von Ryan's Leaper will save on a 4+. You might have noticed it was only saving on 6s against the captain. There's a particular reason for that, which we'll come to in a minute. As you might have realised, the Space Marines get to go first, but then assuming they don't kill the one Von Ryan's Leaper, it will get to hit back. So it has 6 attacks to hit on 3s, and it has strength of 5, which against toughness of 4 on the Space Marines will be wounding on 3s. And down here it does say that the Infernus Marines have a save of 3+, and that's referenced in the text and the little example at the bottom. There is a reason why that's actually slightly wrong, which we'll go over in what's coming up next. So I'm not sure why they've done it differently here. It could be a mistake, or it could be deliberate to try and make the game a little bit more balanced for one side, I don't know. We'll probably do it this way the first time, and then we'll do it the correct way in a minute. But bear in mind that normally when Space Marines are fighting Von Ryan's Leapers, they will not be saving on 3s in melee, so don't get that number too stuck in your head. Because then we have a more in-depth treatment of datasheets and the attack sequence. This is starting to build up to some slightly more in-depth rules, and we're going to go over some slightly more detailed versions of what we've just looked at. But at the bottom there's actually a QR code you can scan, which will take you to the website where you can find the datasheets for all of the models that will be coming in Combat Patrol, plus some extra things. And it also does confirm that we will get a little datasheet combat card for everything in the collection. Here we have a detailed overview of datasheets and a label for everything that is on them. The ones that have got a highlighted green heading here are the ones that we need in this game. It includes damage actually as well, which we didn't talk about here because everything only does 1, but you can see why it does 1 damage when you see the D characteristic on a weapon. And also ballistic skill, which is what they need to hit with ranged attacks, which is not covered here, but will come up very soon, no doubt. All the other ones are not highlighted, and it says that you don't need to worry about them for now because we'll go over them in later issues, so therefore we're not going to do that right now. But if you are interested, this does have a little description of what all of these things mean. Then we learn a bit more about the attack sequence, which is what we've been following, and it's the same order, but it just shows the more generalised version. So first thing you do is select target. There's a picture here where there's a bit of terrain in the way, which prevents a couple of these Infernus Marines from seeing their targets. We will learn about that later, but basically you just select something that's in range and line of sight, or in melee, just select which unit you wish to hit. And then you make your hit rolls. And it also reminds us here about the torrent rule and the random number of attacks that the Pyre Blasters make, which we learnt about in the previous issue and will come up again. Then we have wound rolls and a repeat of the wound chart there to see what you need to wound. But saving throws is worth mentioning. We know what a saving throw is, but there is a characteristic called armor penetration, or AP, for every weapon, and that value modifies the save roll of the target when making a save. So an AP of -1 means that you deduct 1 from the save rolls of the target. So if you had a 3+ save, you'd actually need a 4+, and that's the case here, where the Von Ryan's Leapers, if you look back at their melee weapons, do have an AP of -1. So the Marines should have their save rolls reduced by 1, essentially needing a 4+ to save, as you can see in the cross-referenceable chart here as well. So we'll probably do at least 2 playthroughs of this. Perhaps in the second one we'll show that off to show why the little description earlier is actually technically wrong. And then finally it mentions damage and allocating wounds to models until they are destroyed, and a damage characteristic of more than 1 will obviously do more than 1 damage when it gets a wound through. That's it for all of that. If that seemed like a lot of information, it will probably become more apparent during the game. And also, just to mention again, on the back page you get even more wound markers, so you should never run out now. So here are 3 of our brave Infernus Marines. We've been ambushed by only 1 Leaper to start with, but they get to go first, as we saw in the playthrough. So they have 3 attacks each with their melee weapons, which hit on 3s. only have 4 hits, but I suppose they were surprised. But then they will wound on 5s because the Leaper is toughness 5. Nothing at all. So
the Leaper has 6 attacks, also hitting on 3s. Oh, it's a bit confused as well. It's only got 3 hits, but wounding on 3s because it's strength 5 versus toughness 4. And remember, having higher strength than toughness means you wound on 3s. And it's 3 wounds.
And as we said, we'll go with the 3+ save for this starting one, which is what they say in the playthrough, but we'll see what happens later. Well, I would have passed all of those anyway, even if we were taking into account the extra AP. So back to the Marines. 3s to hit. That's a bit better. That was 6 hits. 5s to wound, though. Oh, 3.
Yeah, 4+ saves. You need to make at least one of these. Oh, I only made 1, so the Leaper's down to just 1 wound.
But it does get to go.
6 attacks on 3s. It's only got 3 hits. And 2 wounds.
Saves. Now, I've made 2, but I would have failed those if we were using the full rules, but we'll stick with this for now. And then we hit back. 5 hits this time. But no wounds. Leaper's still alive.
And it gets 5 hits this time. It's angry. And 3s. And 4 wounds.
This time I have failed 2 saves, regardless of what version of the rules we're playing, so that will kill a 2 wound Space Marine, so we're down to 2 left, meaning we only have 6 attacks back, 4 hits, and a wound.
Gotta make the save. No. So the Leaper is killed. 2 surviving Marines.
So with the very basic version of the rules, the Marines win the first encounter. So perhaps we'll try that again with the same number of models, but we'll actually take into account the Leaper's armor penetration this time, just to see if it can do a bit better. So we'll let the Marines go first again, with their 9 attacks, getting 5 hits this time, and needing 5s to wound, only getting 1.
And with a 4 to save, no, down to 2 wounds on the Leaper. 6 attacks, needing 3s, getting 3, and 3s to wound, getting 3.
So then I make my save rolls and taking into account the Leaper's -1 AP that we should have been doing before. This means all the dice I roll are modified by -1. So effectively I'm looking for 4s because those will be modified down to 3s, which would be a successful save. Get them all in the box. So that will be 2 failures there, the 5 modified to a 4, the 3 to a 2, which will kill a Marine because they have 2 wounds each. And then we get 6 attacks back from the remaining ones. They only hit 3 times. 5s to wound, nothing.
6 attacks from the Leaper, getting 3 again, and no wounds.
6 attacks back, only 3 hits as well, and 1 wound this time.
Needing a 4, no, down to 1. Need to do better this time. Oh, 6 attacks that all hit, and all wound.
Oh dear. So looking at for 4s. We actually only make 1 of them, so 5 wounds will just cut the remaining 2 Marines down quite easily. So the Leaper wins that round, and obviously it's a little bit random with this few models, but you can see that both sides do have a chance of winning this. So now we'll do what the magazine suggests and increase the number of combatants. And we thought we'd just go straight ahead and use all the models. We've got 5 Infernus Marines, including the Sergeant. Not that he does anything special, but we haven't seen him yet. Against all 3 Von Ryan's Leapers. So the Marines are probably going to have their work cut out for them because, as we saw, even 1 Leaper is a match for 3 Marines. But we'll at least let them go first. So all 5 Marines together will have 15 attacks. So they're looking for 3s, getting 11 hits, and then still needing 5s. 3.
4+ saves, made 1. So that does mean 1 Leaper is down to 1 wound. But with all 3 Leapers alive, it means we get 18 attacks looking for 3s. Now that's only 7 hits, but needing 3s to wound, so 5 wounds.
And using the AP again, we're looking for 4s to save, failing 3, so we will lose an entire Marine and somebody will be wounded. That leaves me with 12 attacks back. 8 hits, wounding on 5s. 3.
4s to save. Sue only made 1, so the wounded Leaper will be killed, and then another Leaper will take a damage and go down to 2 wounds. Only 12 attacks coming back at the Marines, looking for 3s. That's 7 hits again, they are consistent at the very least. And that will be 6 wounds. 6
saves to make. Oh, I only made 2, so another 4 damage, so 1 to kill that guy, 2, 3, and then a wound on another one. And that leaves me with 6 attacks in return. Well, we've got 5 hits. 5s, only 1.
Well, I made the save, so no damage going through. 12 attacks. Ooh, we're improving. That's up to 9 hits. 3s to wound. That's 6 wounds.
On average, they will be dead, but the dice say no. We have only taken 2 wounds.
Sarge lives.
Well, he's got his knife out, so let's see what he can do. Well, he hit 3 times, and he wounded twice. Oh, he is mad.
He's mad. Oh, well, I made both the saves. 12 attacks on Sarge. 8 hits. Ooh, and 6 wounds.
He needs to make 6 saves to live. No, failed 4. So Sarge is killed. Not a great surprise, although the Marines were doing quite well at one point, that the Leapers can take them on in melee. But anyway, I think that'll do for the games for this issue. I think you get the idea. So we'll recap all of that for you now. So that was the game from issue 4 of Warhammer 40,000 Combat Patrol magazine. How did you think that went?
Oh, it's mostly just reiterating things you've gone up to this point. I think maybe I got a bit unlucky with the save rolls, but I think it does demonstrate that perhaps the Infernus Marines don't want to be in melee. It's certainly not with Tyranids that are bigger than them, because their wounding on 5s is what really makes them struggle. The Leapers being able to wound on 3s meant that even 1 was able to cut them down fairly quickly.
Yeah, I mean, if you hadn't guessed, the close combat weapons that they have are not dedicated melee weapons like the Captain's Sword or anything like that. They're just what they can do in melee. The 4+ save is, well, average, I suppose, but not having any AP means that they're not going to be doing a huge amount of damage in melee, certainly. I'm not sure why they didn't include the AP in the previous section. Occasionally in these magazines they've deliberately made slight modifications for balance reasons, but the fact that they then essentially contradicted themselves a few pages later doesn't seem to make all that much sense. So do the second version of what we were doing, not the first version. The Leapers do have some AP on their claws.
Yeah, and especially since they took into account with previous issues as well.
Yes, the Captain's save was being modified when he was fighting these Leapers, for example, so why they weren't doing it with Infernus Marines, we don't know, but never mind.
Yeah, and I think with the datasheet rules, we haven't learned everything that's on datasheets, but with the rules you have now, you could actually start to play some very simple games with the Winged Tyranid Prime and the Terminator Captain as well. You could probably figure out how movement works on your own, or you could just use the simplified version from the previous issue if you really wanted to.
Yes, because knowing how weapons work and knowing how strength and toughness and wounds and save work, that's the basics of fighting in the game, really. The only thing we're missing mainly is range for ranged weapons. That'll be coming quite soon, no doubt. And then obviously we started to talk about painting in this issue.
Yeah, so you've got 3 paints. You've got Macragge Blue, Baratnar Burgundy and Wraithbone, and the starter brush. The starter brush honestly isn't very good. Well, I suppose that just does mean you don't have to worry too much about being neat with it. I think we will get a medium layer brush later on, which will effectively replace it, but it's fine for now. And it's just the bare basics of painting. It takes a little bit of practice. Once you get used to it, it's better to do multiple thin layers than one thick layer. It takes a little bit of patience as well, and you kind of get a knack for it to get some nice solid coverage.
Yes, and they do tell you to paint the entire model with the starter brush, which will take quite a while. It is important to generally put a base coat on a model so you have that base colour to start with, and it also helps the rest of the paint stick to the plastic of the model. There are ways you can do that without doing it with a brush, like with a spray can or whatever, but they don't ever mention that in these magazines because they don't include them with the magazine or indeed with the subscriber gifts or anything. I suspect the reason for that is probably because it's hard to include them because they're big, and I think they'd also be age limited, so they probably would have to increase the minimum age recommendation for the magazine if they included spray cans, but that is the common way of base coating a model rather than using a brush.
Would recommend using a spray can, and specifically try and get ones that are meant for models, so like a Games Workshop one or Vallejo, Army Painters ones are alright. Don't get ones that are for like spraying cars and things, because they often can be too thick.
Yes, and the advantage of the Citadel ones as well is they're the same colours as the paints you get in the pot, but that doesn't necessarily matter if it's black or white, for example.
But they do sell spray cans of Wraithbone and Macragge Blue.
Yeah, and again, as we said in the previous episode, you will see fully painted models on this channel only, just because that looks much better for filming, but don't worry if you're a complete beginner and you're not sure whether you can paint them to this sort of standard. This is exactly what the magazine is for. It'll take you through very gentle steps and build up the colours gradually.
One thing to note is that generally with issues that give you paints, they generally aren't good savings. You actually can be more expensive than buying them individually, but with the savings you'll get on models throughout the whole of the magazine, they will end up as quite a big saving overall. That is one thing to note, that if you're not that bothered about the contents of the magazine, you just want the models, you might want to buy your own paints.
But otherwise, I think that's all we have to say for this episode. So let us know what you thought in the comments below. If you've played the game, then let us know how it went. If you've started painting your models, let us know if you're following the magazine, or if you're a complete beginner, or if you're trying something else. We've been the Tabletop Donkeys, and we'll see you in the next one.
Bye for now.